Yeah, this is Mike Anderson again with Anderson's Pretty Water Farms. Today I wanted to talk about the garden. We've been growing gardens now for probably 14, 15 years here. And behind me here is the tomatoes. And I have 3 different varieties. If you saw my earlier video, it was showing how to plant tomatoes by seed. But these are the results of my tomatoes by seed. I have what they call Parks Whoppers, which is a Brandywine tomato. And then I have Marglobe, which is a medium-sized tomato, and then the Garden Delight, which is a small salad tomato. But the garden is coming along well right now. We've had not too much rain. It was right on the verge of too much, but it did all right. Our hardest problem this year has been the cool weather, and but it seems like we're finally over that hump now, and forecast now showing for like 7 or 8 days of nice 80s and temps, so that'll work out real well. If you noticed on these tomatoes, we have what we call top hats, and that's these little landscaping fabric, and we just cut little squares, and when we start the plant in, when we transplant it here, they'll be down here, and what that's done in the past is protected them from hail. And also when they're first transplanted, if we have a lot of sun, it will give them, make it a little easier for them to transplant over into the garden. So it's a twofold deal there. And so far this year, we've had 2 hailstorms this spring, and they saved them. They was well worth having them on. It's just a little insurance is what we do. And also, if on the determinate tomatoes, which is only going to grow so tall, and then that's as tall as they're going to get, they can prevent them from getting sunspots and stuff on the tomatoes in the hot sun. So it's a little shade doesn't hurt so much then. And on the indeterminate, then those, you just got to take them off, because they're just going to continue growing, and they'll grow right outside of these cages here. They'll just keep on growing. There'll be just a mass of vegetation there with hopefully good, nice tomatoes. So that's our tomatoes. And if you notice, what I was able to do this year is I had a neighbor down the road. He had a bunch of hay bales that he didn't need, some old hay. And so normally what we do is whenever we mow, we'll take the grass clippings and put it on around the plants for mulch. Well, since he had so much extra hay, I was able to use the hay as a mulch. So it's worked out real well for us, as long as we don't get too much rain. So like last year, this would not have worked, but this year the rain hasn't been as bad as it was last year, so it's worked out well. But the tomatoes are doing good. I'm starting to see tomatoes, that big around or so on them, and the blooms are starting to really pop out, so won't be long, and they'll be just covered with tomatoes, and hopefully we'll have a good tomato crop, because last year it was terrible. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your camera, and I'm going to just walk down around there, and we'll talk about each one of these plants that I've got, each variety, and we'll just discuss. If you'll notice, when making a garden, like we have, basically we use 20 acres, and so the 20 acres we're able to grow. We raise cattle, we raise chickens, we got a big pond that raises fish for us, and then we have our bees, And then we have our gardens, and then we have our berries. We have blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, and then pecans. Last year we ended up with 50 pounds of meat on the pecan side, and that was a good year. But we just have one big tree. We have several small trees that are growing right now, but we only have one tree that actually produces pecans, and it's about the size of a Stewart pecan. It's probably a medium-sized pecan, and it's just makes great pecans. But anyway, I'm going to take you around and show you the different things, and we'll talk about them and talk about the garden in general. Whenever I was deciding where I wanted to put my garden, I was looking for a slightly sloped area, and because I wanted a runoff, I wanted it to drain well, and then in this farm we're able to take the cow manure. Let's say like after this garden is all done at the end of the year, what I do is I pile up my cow manure and everything in a pile and let it set through the summer, and then after my garden is done I will spread it on my garden. And then also any of the mulch that's on this garden, you know, I've got probably 3 or 4 inches of hay laying around on this, and if it's not hay, it's grass clippings. So I try to keep it, and right now underneath that hay, all them organisms and worms and things is working that ground, and it's just getting more and more fertile, and it's just it makes for a good garden. And if you pay attention to your garden every year and the soil, and just try to you know, enrich it in every way you can, it will reward you when it comes time for harvest. And so I'm really big on supporting the foundation of your garden, you know, that good soil. That's what it really needs. So I'm going to take you around here, and I'll show you the garden here. As you can see, our the tomatoes there, now you can see them at a different length. We have about 90 tomato plants, so that ought to give us a tremendous amount of tomatoes. And I ran out of little supporting deals there, so I just left these the way they were. Now these here, this is our green beans, and the variety is a contender. It's a nice green bean that puts on lots of green beans, and it just makes a good canning green bean for us, and we really enjoy them. They're good. And I got 3 rows here, and I got another row on down the way there. And we plant these right into the rows, you know. And then here we have our onions. I've got about 1,000 onions, and we buy these in little bundles that's wrapped around with rubber band bundles, and each bundle will hold about 50 to 75 onions. And these here, they look like they're getting ready to seed, and you don't really want that, so I'll go around and pinch those off, and you want all the energy going into that onion there. But they're just about at the end of their life cycle here. So for us, because onion, they're a 2-year plant. The first year they just they come up, and then the second year they'll start seeding and making for the next year. So, but we don't really want these seeds on here. So, but anyway. On the next little row, we got peppers, and I planted those in the greenhouse. and I've got jalapeno and bell peppers and red peppers, and just 3 or 4 different varieties of peppers. And so they seem to all be doing well, and this summer we'll have lots of jalapeno and bell peppers. These potatoes here, these are called Pontiac Reds, and what's fascinating about these little rascals is you take the potato, you cut it up, and you cut them in sections. Like if you have a potato that's 2 or 3 inches in diameter, you'll cut it in about 2 or 3 different parts. Make sure they have eyes on each of the parts, and then you cut a deep row, and you plant them and put dirt over them, and then let them grow. And then once they come up about 6 or 8 inches or so, you'll go in and hoe. Also, just want to show you something. If you look straight over there, there's some geese going across there. That's a parent and a bunch of baby Canadian geese. Well, that orange fence over there is the reason that orange fence is there is to keep those little rascals out of this garden. But anyway, this potatoes, after they get up about 6 or 8 inches, you'll plow, take a tiller, hand tiller, and till between the rows, and then you'll rake the dirt up around those plants, and then they'll grow back up again, and you try to do it again, and just build up around them plants as they're growing. And then what I normally do is, after I've done that twice, I'll come back and I'll fill it full of hay or grass or clippings or anything I got, and then that last, as they're growing up, they're making little roots, and that's where your tomatoes is going to be, little suckers. And then you don't want that potato to see the sun. You want it to keep it under wraps. So. And then as the potatoes are growing and bulging, they're bulging into the ground and coming out of the ground, and that's why that hay and stuff works real well right at the very end. And that'll, any of them that do pop out of the ground will still be covered by that grass. So, but the interesting thing about these potatoes is we got another 5 rows of these in a back garden back there, and back there we do what we call the squish squish crunch crunch. And since this is an organic garden, we don't use pesticides or anything like that, so we walk between the rows and we squish the potato bugs. Well, the young potato bugs is a soft-shelled, mushy-looking little bug, and we call that the squish squish. And whenever a mature potato bug, it's a hard shell, and it goes crunch crunch. So when we're on squish squish crunch crunch detail, well, you know what we're doing. We're out smashing bugs, and or they will just eat your crop. Now, what's curious about this particular crop is we haven't touched this crop this year here in the front. Now in the back, every morning and evening we go back there and do a squish squish crunch crunch detail. But on these, they've never had a bug one on them, and I'm not sure why. I know I tilled this one and that one at different times, and we had a late frost that killed these potatoes plants back. I mean, they just looked black and they just died back, and then they came back. But I don't know if it was because of that or what, but the time that I plowed or whatever, when I plowed the garden, maybe it had a hard freeze or something, and you know, it killed the bugs here. I don't know what it is, but every past year we've always had to squeeze and do the squish squish crunch crunch. So I'm not sure what it was, but boy, I'd sure like to know what it was, because it sure has saved us a lot of time from not having to come up here and kill bugs. These here is our cabbage, and they're starting to make a heads on them now. They'll probably be, once they really start, it don't take long, and they'll be full-blown mature cabbage heads, and delicious. Everybody loves them around here. And these here, I planted these, the cabbage and the broccoli over here next to me in the greenhouse. So that's something that we started as seed. And the broccoli here, we've been picking it. It's mostly pretty much done. I still got a few heads on it, and I don't have my knife with me, but you can go in here and find something that but there's just a little, I'd already cut the head, and this is just one of the small shoots on the side that comes up on these, and I'll probably get another 5-gallon bucket of them, but that'll be about the end of it. And we love broccoli here, and Mama, she pretty much freezes all it, and we eat a lot of fresh broccoli, so it's good stuff. Now on the corn, we got lots of corn, and the reason why I plant so much corn is the fact that my bees like it. Whenever this corn, and what I do, I put it in rotation kind of. What I do, I planted the first half of the 4 rows first, and then I planted these back half 4. And what I did was I did about 2-week intervals, but these two here, the weather was so cold you can't hardly tell them apart, and they're not growing very well for some reason. But anyway, what happens is when this corn grows up, it'll get its tassels up on top of the corn, the male pollen, and then you'll get your corn silk that comes out of the corn ear corn, and those tassels, and the wind blows and it blows down the pollen down onto the silk. Well, the bees loves that pollen up on top of those, on top of that corn, and there'll just be thousands of bees getting that pollen, and it's a real sweet pollen. I don't know, you know, they just love it. So I thought I just rotate it. So every 2 weeks I'll plant a patch of corn. I've got that corn, then this corn, and then over in the other part of the garden over here, I got I'm doing it again. And matter of fact, I'll be planting the later part of it as soon as it dries out enough to where I can get down there and till it up. But so about every 2 weeks I plant a patch of corn somewhere on the place, and that way the bees will have something to eat on later on in the summer when other things might be drying out. Bees really like corn. They like watermelon and cantaloupe, squash blooms. Those right there are the bees, probably the biggest food areas that they like out of the garden. So I tried to plant plenty of squash around, and I love watermelon and cantaloupe, so I plant plenty of that. And then the corn, I think, is their #1. So whatever it takes for the bees, I take care of the bees. And then down here, I have cucumbers along the fence row here, and they do well. I'll train them to go up on this fence, and they will provide us a lot of cucumbers. And then I have purple hull peas, just a single row of purple hull peas, and then that other row of green beans that I was planting. And then I got squash, which is zucchini and straight neck yellow squash. And on the other side of that, I've got 2 rows of okra. And then I got my cantaloupe. I got, and the first half of this from this backside here, this first half is cantaloupe, and then the front half up there is watermelon. So I got 2 rows of those. And then I've got more corn over there. I got 3 rows of corn up there on the up next to the fence over there. I got 3 or 4 rows there, and then this bottom half that's got grass on it, I will till it up and plant another 3 or 4 rows of corn there. And just so it always coming off at different times, and it'll give the bees, and you know, in July and August, when food might be pretty scarce around here, they'll have something to eat on. So, but that's our garden. You see my irrigation system. I got just little sprinklers out here that you can buy at the lumber yard, and I got hoses running to them. And what I've discovered, you know, if you're going to have a decent sized garden, you at first we was using city water, and the city water, it's pretty expensive stuff. For every 1,000 gallons, it costs $5. So then we decided to use the water out of the pond, and we'd pump water out of the pond and put it onto the garden. And that worked out real well until it started drought. We had a drought that lasted for, probably it was ongoing for a couple of years for sure, and the pond got real low, so we decided to drill a well. So we drilled a well and got a well installed, went down 122 feet and got about 18 gallons to the minute. And so then I went and that worked out real well, and the water was okay. It wasn't super water, but it had a little bit too much iron in it, but it was okay. And so we rented one of them trenchers, and we trenched around the whole place, and made about 4,000 feet of ran 4,000 feet of water line, and it goes all the way around to the back, and it gets our orchard, our berries, and our pecan trees, and everything that we wanted watered back there. And I put drip irrigation around it all, and so that has worked out real well. And so all I have to do is, and I put automatic timers on them to where I can water them at different times, and I can schedule it and they just come on. And so that's worked out real well. And this is our garden, and we take real special care of it, and we enjoy the garden. And in the summertime, when the harvest starts coming off, Mama, she'll freeze everything and process it all, and any extra stuff we'll sell to the community or take it to the food bank. And it just helps the community, and it helps us. It helps support the next year's garden, and we just enjoy this kind of life. And once you work in the big city, and you get close to retirement, and you want to get out and try to do something different, and so urban farming, that's I think it's a wonderful thing. And yeah, now I'd like to recap on what we talked about out there at the garden. The tomatoes, we normally pick those when they're just vine ripe right off, nice red juicy tomatoes. Bring them in, slice them, put them on your sandwich or whatever. On the onions, what will happen there is, out there right now, they're starting to break over. What they'll do is them stalks will start to die out, and that's a sign that they're not going to grow anymore. That onion's going to be as big as it's going to get. So what we'll do is I'll get out there and I'll dig those onions up, and I'll just kind of lay them around out there on the right where I dig them up, and just kind of let them sit there for overnight, a day or so, and let them dry out. And then I'll bring them in and I'll cut them stalks off, and I'll just leave about an inch up from that onion, and that's where I'll leave them. And I'll cut that stalk off about an inch above the onion. And I was talking out there about the 2 year. Well, what happens is when that onion is out there in the wild, that onion, the first year it grows, and then normally the second year it'll come back and it'll seed out, and it'll come out with a big bloom of seeds, and that's how it propagates. And so when I was talking about the 2 year, that's what an onion in the wild, that's what it normally does. But when we're raising them for market, well, we don't go that second year. We pull them out of the ground after the first year. They're ready to eat. That's the and all that life force is in that onion, all the good stuff. Peppers, whenever they grow up, your little jalapenos, you know, they'll be 2.5 inches long, and just a nice dark green jalapeno. And you know, if you like jalapenos, you can just bite into it, and if it tastes good to you, it's right. Go for it. And same thing with the bale. Most of them bales will probably be about 3 inches in diameter. Nice big bale for stuffed peppers and things like that. So just when it gets to the size, you know, and you feel like it's right, pluck that little rascal. Potatoes. What happens on potatoes is the plant will start blooming, and the plant at first is just full of life, rich, thick texture, and it'll start wilting and turning yellow and stuff like that, and that's a sign that that potato growth cycle is about done. So that's when you need to get out there and start digging some potatoes up. And you know, and don't forget about new potatoes. You can always go out there and dig around a little early, like right now out there in the front. I bet there's potatoes out there that's 3 inches in diameter probably right now. So I could go out there and probably start digging new potatoes today. Cabbage, the head will be just a nice, you just reach down there and feel of it whenever, and you'll see that top leaf will just kind of curl up like that, and that outer leaf, and you feel of it nice, firm. You know that that's ripe and it's ready to pull. Broccoli, those heads out there, they'll be nice, tight. You know, the little green heads that's on that, or the head will be about 3 to 4 to 6 inches in diameter. Most of mine was about 4 to 5, and it'll be just real tight, net picked in there. And whenever it gets a little too ripe, you'll start seeing those little nodules in there get a little swollen, and it'll start kind of trying to spread out. So you want to pull that broccoli head when it's nice and tight and firm in there. And corn, once the tassels come up, right, and they start shedding out, your silk, you know, is germinating, everything's going on. Well, then after that, it's normally 15 days, somewhere like that. I don't know after that, but you'll see that ear corn just start spreading out away from the stalk. And when that ear corn gets sticking out there, you know, facing about like 10 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, well, you know it's getting real close, and you can feel of it, or rip one down and tell. But normally it's about when it's 10 and 2, you know that that corn is is ready to harvest. Cucumbers, when that cucumbers, you know, the ones I got out there, they're for slicing, and so whenever they get 8 inches long or somewhere thereabout, that's when I'll be pulling those, 8 to 10 inches long, and they'll be ready for harvest. Your peas, when you know, I like to get them when they're just green, they're long, and they're starting to turn brown, and that's when they come out of the pod pretty easy. So that's when I start getting them out of there. After they've the pea is up, it's long, it'll be 8-10 inches long, and it's starting to turn brown real good. That's when I like that. They're kind of tender and they'll pop away. Some people will wait until they're totally brown and the beans kind of swiveled up, but I prefer them when they're still green, and you can spread out that pod and then beans will just fall out of there. Squash, you know, I like a squash. It's got to be tender, so a yellow squash, straight neck, normally the little tail of it, they've got a little flower, that little bloom, and once that bloom starts disintegrating, just about to fall off, that's when it's ripe. And so when that tail end of that bloom, you'll see the squash growing, and then that bloom will be on the end of it. And when that bloom is off or just about off, it's just down to nothing. That's when that squash is ripe. And okra, you know, just depends on how you like okra. I like the little pod, the smaller, 3-4 inch pods. They're super tender, super delicious. Sharon, she likes them when they're about 5 inches long, but you don't want to let them get too much longer than 5 or 6 inches, because they get hard and they're not tender. So you don't let them grow any more than 5 or 6 inches, and you'll get familiar with it when you pop in things off and put a knife into it. And when they start to get hard, they just don't cook up very good. And then your watermelon and cantaloupe, the old standard is you know, thumping them, whatever, makes a good good hollow sound, thump thump. And on the cantaloupe, the way I do it is I'll when that cantaloupe will turn yellow, kind of a light tan color, you know, then the vine where it connects to it, you can just touch it. And when that vine pops off, when it's just so close to being ripe, you can touch that where it's connected to the vine, and it will just fall off right off the vine, so you know it's good and right then. And that's how I gauge how my vegetables are ripe. So if you have any questions or comments, just write them in, and be happy to answer any questions you may have. This is Mike Anderson at Anderson's Pretty Water Farm. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.